Welcome to Harder Than It Looks, Parking Uncovered, a podcast that illuminates real solutions to common problems within the parking industry. I'm your host, Brian Wolf, CEO of Parker Technology, and in each episode, I'll introduce you to real parking pros that will bring their own tips, tricks, and best practices to manage what we all know is harder than it looks, parking a car. On the show today is Kenyata Smiley, MPA, the Transportation Planning Department Manager at HNTB, a company that designs and builds transportation infrastructure. Kenyata Smiley is an accomplished transportation planning department manager in the HNTB Atlanta office. Kenyata provides project and program management and oversight for multimodal transportation projects and federal grant programs. That's a mouthful. That's a big job. Her key responsibilities include strategic planning, preliminary engineering, capital program development, equity analysis, and project prioritization. Kenyata has 20 years of experience in the transportation industry and has spent the last 8 years successfully navigating transit agencies and local governments through the National Environmental Protection Act, NEPA, processes. Being a seasoned collaborator and excellent communicator, Kenyata is adept at identifying and cultivating relationships with the public, elected officials, and local partners. We're going to get into that. Kenyata currently serves as the president of Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, which is COMTO, in the Atlanta chapter, and is a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. Kenyata, welcome to Harder Than It Looks.
Thank you, Brian, for having me on today. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be good. You've got a really big job. I'm not sure we're going to be able to do it justice in 45 or 55 minutes, but we're going to do our best. So one of the things that I like to do with my guests right off the bat is I like to hand them the mic and I ask them, go back as far as you want to go in your professional, even your personal life, and start there and then bring us forward, because ultimately we'll obviously end up with the big job that you have now. So hand you the mic. It's all yours. Tell us the Kenyata story.
That may take a little while, but I'll try to sum it up very quickly. So inner city youth of Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is in Hamilton County, grew up in a single parent household. And it was a one-car household. So we did have a car, but having older siblings and us all being very active in sports, we saw the pressure that we put on our moms to be in multiple places at the same time, oftentimes. And so with that, we had a local public transportation system in Chattanooga known as CARTA, and that stands for the Chattanooga Area Regional Transportation Authority. And so I quickly learned how to use the bus, not just for my sports and extracurricular activities at school, but also to get to and from work. Because I did grow up working at the local grocery store. It was formerly named Red Food Store. It's no longer in existence. But I liked the independence that it gave me. I also liked the fact that me and my siblings didn't feel like I was pulling on our mother in multiple directions to try to figure out how to get us all around. Although she did a perfectly good job at it. Whenever we could help her out, we chose to do that. So I was on a track coming from the community that I grew up in to be an attorney. It's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do copyright and contracts, wanted to work for Warner Brothers, and I was on a path to do that. So while I was admitted to North Carolina A&T, I got a call on the day that I was moving into school. And as I'm receiving the call, I'm actually standing there in the office, in the admissions office at North Carolina A&T. And I'm receiving a notification that I'm being waitlisted for my scholarship and for my housing. And that it was going to be another 12 to 18 months before I could start law school. So with that being said, I went home back to Chattanooga and realized that if I was going to go through law school, I didn't need my mind to get idle. I didn't need to get out of my good study habits, right? Because law school is very intensive. So during that time period, I took a class in public administration. And then as a result of that, I was focusing on nonprofit and community building and was really enjoying my studies in that area, again, as I was waiting to go to law school. During that time period, I got an internship with the Regional Planning Agency in Chattanooga. And really, the rest is history. I never looked back. I never made it to law school. I did get my master's in public administration. And as a result of that, began doing public engagement work through the Regional Planning Agency there in Chattanooga. And what was unique about that is that it's a bi-state MPO, so it also has North Georgia. So I was not just collaborating on things within the city of Chattanooga, but in portions of North Georgia as well. And what I quickly learned and understand and gleaned from that is that as much as we try to keep things separate, especially transportation, everything is really interrelated as it relates to our infrastructure. So with that, I became passionate about educating communities that are being impacted about the planning process and how it's important for them to understand when these things are taking place because they're going to ultimately affect them. And although they may not be able to stop it inevitably, sometimes they are successful at stopping projects. But when they're not, at least they can help shape and inform the change that is going to ultimately impact them in the end.
Yeah. Okay. And so that was Chattanooga. How did you end up then with HNTB? Or were there hops in between?
There were some hops in between, and let me just say, so get federal transportation bills every time we have a new presidency and a new administration, and those often come down through the U.S. Department of Transportation. So many moons ago, back in actually before 2010, human services transportation became of interest to our government. And what that is really looking at the mobility needs of older adults, persons with disabilities, and then individuals with low income. That has since grown to English proficiency, our youth and young adults, but basically looking at our vulnerable populations, how we move today, getting them to where they need to go. And ultimately, we want those things to get them to where they want to go as well. So I started that work and successfully developed one of the first plans. And I got noticed by the Atlanta Regional Commission for my work, which I was presenting on at a national transportation conference. And a job position came open specifically for human services transportation planner. I interviewed and they hired me, and the rest is history. So I
Yeah.
spent the bulk of my career in the public sector, working at the Atlanta Regional Commission, working for MARTA, the Metropolitan Area Regional Transit Authority, and also working for the city of Atlanta. But the one thing that ARC did for me, because ARC is a 20 county MPO area, and that's a metropolitan planning organization, is that it allowed me to work with multiple counties, all different types of communities and leaders. And so that was very instrumental in shaping how I look at planning now and forever for the rest of my life.
You were destined to take this job from the day you stepped on the bus for the first time, I suspect.
Yes.
That's awesome. So how old were you when you started riding the bus to relieve your mom? It told me a lot, by the way, about you.
I would say 16 by myself, because we used to travel downtown sometimes with my grandmother growing up. Sometimes we would take the bus with her because my grandmother didn't drive. Transit was always a part of my life, as far as moving around. And so I know over the years, especially in the Southeast area, there's a lot of stigma and a lot of myths around utilizing transit, but I see transportation as a tool for me. I don't look at it as like a luxury or a pleasure. I see really transportation and public transportation as a civil right because there are people that can't afford a car or for whatever reason, life circumstances, they may not even be able to operate a vehicle, and they have every right to have good mobility just like everyone else.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. We're going to get into the equity piece here. We'll dive in there after we get a thumbnail sketch of what your job looks like today, because what I could tell you is in doing the research, I went through a PowerPoint deck that you presented. I think it was like 2017 or something.
Okay.
And my brain was melting. I can only assume that the people you were presenting to knew the acronyms and understood the process at a high level, but there was just a lot going on. And I'm trying to wrap my mind around how one plans a project that's probably 5 or 10 years in the future.
Yeah.
Give us a thumbnail sketch of what your day looks like, or maybe a week, because a day probably doesn't do it. Maybe a week or a month in the life of a transportation planner.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I would like to say I was sharing my public sector. During the pandemic, I took a leap of faith, right? And came over to the private sector because I did find myself in my career needing to transition in a place where I felt like I was influencing decisions proactively instead of reactively.
Okay.
Anyone who's in the planning business knows that oftentimes we react. So what's a day or a week like, or even a month like for me? It's very busy. You shared planning projects that are 5 and 10 years down the road. But that's a framework, that's a landscape, right? So I start my mornings with meetings and I'm in meetings all day. And I start a lot of tasks, and sometimes I don't complete them within one day, but like today's Friday. So anything I haven't cleared off of my task list, of course, I'll do that sometime today. But I start with the data, right? I think that everything that we do in planning should be data driven. And when I say the data, I do look at raw data. It could be census data, American Community Services data from that particular county or jurisdiction that I may be working with the planning project. I like to look at the raw data. I like to then map points. And then I like to familiarize myself with the community where this project is being planned. So that actually means Kenyatta taking a site visit down to the
Nice.
area where the project is going to plan, because I have to get a feel for the community. So I'm very strong on diversity and being inclusive. And so therefore, we have to look at the demographic makeup of our communities. I believe in meeting communities where they are. So that means that you may have some people that are fluent, you may have educated people, you may have people of low income, you may have older adults, but whoever they are, we want their voice and their perspective to be heard. It's not about agreeing, but it is about reaching consensus on how to do the greatest good for the overall community. So I may meet with elected officials. I may meet with a DOT director or a manager. I may also meet with like local community leaders, whether that's someone from a church or like in the city of Atlanta, they have neighborhood planning units. I deal with Rotary clubs, all types of grassroots communities and
Yep.
organizations. So it's a lot of meeting, a lot of listening, that these are the thoughts that are before us. And the good part about what I do as a planner is I'm looking from concept and helping to develop that project before it actually is handed off to the engineers. So I'm talking with the community, what's working with you, for you, what's not working for you. How can we make things better for you, make it easier for you to move around and affordable and safe, because safety is a huge issue. And it's a pillar of everything that I do on a day-to-day basis. It's getting with my teammates. I work with a group of modelers and planners and engineers and just a really great, robust group of people. And I say, listen, this is the concept. That's the idea. First of all, is this feasible? Can we do this?
Yep.
Is it going to have a positive impact on the community? Is it going to make things better? Because we also want to build infrastructure that is resilient, right? So that in the case that something happens and there's a breakdown, we can get everything back up operating quickly. And we're looking at anything from sustainability to being environmentally friendly. But most of all, is it accessible? Is it attractive
Yeah.
to the people that it's going to affect at the end of the day? My weeks are busy, meetings, but also a lot of data review, but also a lot of conversation in large groups to make sure we're getting all that thought leadership and all the different perspectives, because I find when we do, that's when we get our greatest level of innovation, by having as many people in the room from different places with different perspectives, getting that all out and really looking at where there are gaps and seeing how we can make improvements. And if it's something completely new, then that's even more fun, because then we get to go to the community in like a charrette style format and just have these types of dialogues. Also spend a lot of time doing targeted focus groups. And outside of that, I think where I spend the bulk of my time is just really looking at things from a bird's eye view, as well as getting on the ground. So you do have high level recommendations that the planning team makes, but then you also have on the ground what we know is practical. So yeah, just busy, just talking, collaborating with a lot of people to make sure that we're thinking of everything from every perspective so that we can try to accommodate as many people.
Yeah. Okay. So you said a lot there. A couple of things that I love. First, it sounds like you like to get a little dirt under your fingernails. So you're going to go to the lowest levels and start talking about projects that are going to impact the people locally. But you also have to take into consideration that there are bigger forces at play, and the folks on the ground, the people on the ground that it's going to impact probably don't, they only appreciate what's happening in their square of the world, and your ability to articulate the impact of it on a larger basis so that they can appreciate it's about progress without being, the only word that comes to mind is punitive. I don't think it's punitive, but they're trying to understand why. I can only imagine things like why roads have to get widened or why bridges have to get made and suddenly they're dead end roads and things like that. That's my guess, is some of the stuff that goes on. Or maybe even how much of it is public transportation driven versus roads, or is it an equal mix?
I would say that it's an equal mix. What people know is just the way our communities are built. Once suburbia became a concept, roads became the main conversation. Even back in Eisenhower's days, when we were building the interstate system, no one knew what the landscape of our infrastructure was going to look like. So this is what I tell people: live as close to the things that you like as you can. So I would say the mix is pretty even. I tend to focus on things that are public in the work that I do because of the equity piece that rolls into there.
Yep.
but we need all of it. So I respect a road the same way I do a highway, a bridge, or a bus, for that matter. So I do spend a lot of times talking with people about how do we integrate that and make those things work together peacefully, right? If you look at our transportation system 50, 60 years ago, everybody understood that we all started out as a pedestrian. We respected pedestrians and it was safe for pedestrians to walk. It was safe for people to bike. We were using buggy and cars. I'm taking us all the way back,
Yeah.
trains, and then the car came and we progressed. I do try to give people that picture that
Yep.
a roadway should be built for everyone. So let me know how you feel safe on this particular road.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Okay. So have you got a particular project that you could tell us about? So something that you started, and maybe we're still 3 or 5 years away, because I remember when we talked earlier, a big part of your job on the front end is the feasibility piece and the impact that it's going to make on the local folks, which is what we've talked about now. And tell us about something that's going on right now that we'll see in 5 years.
I'll do my best to do that while
Okay.
respecting my clients. Since I am in the private sector now, I don't have as much freedom to particularly say. But what I will say is that there are a couple of projects that we're working on and that I'm specifically leading right now. One is actually policy. And some people don't see the policy as the sexy piece.
Yeah.
But the reason why that policy is so important, it talks about how we're going to prioritize our funding for different projects here in the Atlanta urbanized area. And then it gives guidelines and standards, right? Why are guidelines and standards so important? I know some people think that they're just there for the sake of being there, but
Yeah.
it really serves as a foundation to do exactly what I said, that we are developing projects that will benefit the communities that they are affecting.
Yeah.
And so what I will say is that throughout the Atlanta urbanized area, all the counties and cities and even the different transit agencies, as well as the airport, the port, you name it, all of these things work together. I would say that we are convening conversations to make sure that everything that we're doing is well integrated and that it's not going to have a negative impact. So what we want to stop doing is having to retrofit and want to get in the habit of building things the way they should be in the first place and leave it open so that as new future things come on, because we know technologies are always evolving, that you can easily build those things in because you've already accommodated for it. And then I would say from a public transportation standpoint, I don't know if this project will come to fruition or not, but we have been working diligently to try to figure out how to provide better service for people throughout the Atlanta urbanized area. So being a lot focused on those key destinations where people want to go, but also being cognizant of training, jobs, education, things that will help connect people with the opportunities that they need to better their lives. And so I know I'm being a little broad here, but I think that we'll see in the next 5 to 10 years is that at least from a public infrastructure standpoint, is that we're going to be giving priority to the right things so that I won't promise that the gridlock won't come because you can't let people get out of their cars. And rightfully, right, you can control everything in
Yeah.
your car when it's your car
Yep.
and you're driving. But I will say that we're going to be providing more options for people, making it safer if you want to bike to work, walk to work. And maybe you don't live near your home and you have to drive, but maybe you don't have to drive in a car by yourself. Right. Maybe you can carpool with someone, or maybe you can choose to Uber or Lyft or take a bus. So I would say that we're working very hard to make sure that all of those things work together within the existing right of way.
Yeah. Okay. So is any of the work that you're doing involved like light rail or trying to extend like the MARTA system into the neighboring counties? I'm just curious because I have been a consumer of MARTA. I love public transportation that way, taking trains from airports and from downtown areas to get to places just because then I don't have to worry about parking. Everybody wants to be in their cars. We can all relate to that for sure. Anything exciting going on in Atlanta that you can tell us about from that perspective?
I think there's lots of exciting things, and not necessarily from the light rail perspective, but from the bus rapid transit perspective.
Okay.
I think a lot of people, a lot of leaders, and then just a lot of people, when they take vacations, they go to other areas and they see these bus rapid transit systems and they think, oh, this may work well for us. But as we all know, Atlanta is unique.
Yes.
And we know that it's not a one size fit all, but I think you will see more focus on bus rapid transit routes I think you will see more focus on potentially within the existing roadway, figuring out how to make sure that transit can flow freely, right? And it's not
Yeah.
getting caught up in the congestion with all the other modes. So I
Yeah.
think you'll see a lot of conversation about how to build that out and how to expand that and how to make things more efficient from a service operations standard.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So now one of the questions I had is, because going back to that PowerPoint deck and even our previous conversation, how does an idea get into the funnel, if you will?
It's
Who comes up
possible.
with the ideas? Yeah.
It's possible. Everybody comes up with the ideas. So I don't want people to think that it's only happening at the top. It can very well be a bottoms up approach. But I think what's important for people to understand is that it takes a collective body to get any project into anything. Georgia is a home rule state, right? So how that gets into a plan or in the pipeline really depends on where you live and what that local process is. So
Okay.
every citizen can meet, with their elected official, whether it's a council member or a district member. It may be someone from that jurisdiction's planning department, zoning department. So you have to figure out the right person to go talk to. And of course, we can help guide people through that through the work that we do. But
Yeah.
it's about writing your idea, providing the why, right? Because everything is about creative, the story. And you do have to justify a need and purpose. Once you've justified a need and purpose, then there is a process for people to can get projects into what we call concept design or project development. But the process does vary depending upon where you live and your elected official structure.
Yeah. Okay. So if I'm in an outlying county in Atlanta or for Atlanta, then there's probably an infrastructure there to a planning department that I could go in and say, listen, I have to walk 3 blocks to a bus route. I'd like to see if there's a way to get a bus route closer to where I live. Is that a fair example?
It is a fair example, and it's also working, whether it's a planning board or a planning department. It's also understanding who operates that particular transportation and contacting them, because I would tell that person that you do want to have that collaboration from both ends so that you can bring it together. So yes, talking with the right people in the planning department as well as the individual service provider to let them know that you feel like there's a need there that you think that they can help you fill. So.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about your passion for equity. Take me through how you look at things from that perspective. Obviously, your early childhood experiences were a big part of that, I'm sure, and how ultimately people listening to this podcast can help you in your efforts to do better with equity.
Yeah, so equity is what brings me to work in the morning. I will say that. We're talking a lot about what I do here in my current position, but at the end of the day, I'm a servant and I believe in giving back. And if I could just help make life easier for someone else, then that gives me purpose. That's what drives me. And
Yeah.
I would say directly from my experience, why equity is so important to me. Growing up as an African American female in a majority white city, where there was a lot of what I would call institutional barriers to help me easily navigate gaining more education in the areas that I wanted to, just because of how I looked. Really, at an early age, made me realize that people say, oh, we don't judge you by how you look, but that's not really true, right? We're all visual with your eyes. And sometimes we make assumptions based off of that. And some of us do, and some of us don't. But what I would say with that, everything that I'm doing today is for the generations that are coming behind me. And I feel that I have a responsibility to leave things better than how it was handed to me. And not that my predecessors didn't do a good job. They did a good job at what they had. But when you know more and when you know better, then you do better. So for me, it's about a child that is born into poverty, that has no option over where they live, what school they go to, not just saying to them that they have opportunity to be better, but actually facilitating and providing them access to that. And so that's why equity is so important to me, is that there are lots of people that want to better their lives, but there are just a few barriers and challenges that they have that are outside of their control. But we can be good stewards over our infrastructure and make sure that we're putting the right things in place. So if that person does want to aspire or to take advantage of that opportunity, they can actually connect to it and get to it. So I think for helping me day to day in what I do, when you see that legal ad that small legal ad in the paper that says, hey, this project is coming near your house. Please come out, learn more about the project, and provide your feedback. We have to do that. We need to do that. It is a process and a system that is in place. And we can be a part of that process. We can choose to sit on the sideline and just wait to see what's going to happen to us, or we can decide to get in the game and again, help inform and help shape, because we only know what we know and we don't know what we don't know. And so sometimes the people who are starting these projects and these efforts, it's not that they're intentionally not providing things that they need, but they don't know because their experience is different. Maybe they grew up in a house where there were 2 or 3 cars. They have never had to worry about how they're going to get around. They had access to all the things to help them better themselves and to accomplish what they want to. So if you don't show up, there's no guarantee that your voice is going to be heard or represented. So take that on as your own responsibility to make sure that you're going to speak up and you are going to provide input, because if you've never had a mobility issue, like, you have no idea what it's like. I trust you, if you break your foot, you will see just how important your feet are to you, but you don't know if you've always had that full mobility of that. Help by coming out, help by sharing your ideas. There are no dumb ideas. Right. And one thing, too, I challenge people to do when they do come out and provide input, if someone's opinion is different from yours, don't shun them for it. They have a reason why they have that opinion. And even if it doesn't agree with what your opinion is, doesn't mean that it's wrong. And I think we have to learn to be open. And I think it's something that you have to practice. You have to exercise it and strengthen that. Because again, we typically do things based off of our own socialization, our own life experiences. So we have to not only talk and show up and give our input, but we also have to hold people accountable. So here is where we go and we vote and we elect people. And when they do not carry out the will of the constituency, you have an opportunity to make a change the next time it's time for you to vote. So I say get active in your community. Be on the lookout for hearing when there's opportunities to provide input. When the projects are coming, it may not be a roadway project. It may be a new building, a new shopping mall, whatever it is, it all works together. And if you just remember that all of these things are working together and we need to go out and hear and listen and give our input, then I think that's what can help make my job easier on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, great. I'll pay attention to the little legal notice the next time and I'll go participate. That sounds like to be one of the keystones of one of your asks. And then obviously the voting piece about holding people accountable for doing what they said they were going to do, for sure. Do you have a story or two about some input that you got that tended to be pivotal to making either a change in the project or accelerating the project in particular?
Yeah. So when you look at making safe pedestrian facilities, I'm going to go to that because all of us at some point start our trip out as a pedestrian.
Yep.
And oftentimes as planners, I would say planners are a little bit different from engineers, as we're a little bit more visionary, and the engineers tend to calculate their numbers and say, yes, it can work here. We're going to put it here.
Right.
But as I was working on the project on MLK Junior Drive in the city of Atlanta, I was receiving a lot of negative feedback about a turn lane being removed at a specific signalized intersection. And I kept hearing the comment over and over. So you know what I did? I called the MPU leader, asked them to get a few people together if they would go and walk that area for me, with me, so that I could understand what they were talking about. I said, you guys asked us to make this roadway, this intersection safer. I'm giving you recommendations on what to do that, but then you're telling me that's not what you want me to do at all. So when we got down to the signalized intersection and I was able to see where people were actually crossing, even though there was a signalized crossing there, that was not the most convenient place for people to cross.
Okay.
Right? Especially for those who were getting off the bus and carrying groceries. So what that did was allow me to see that this signalized pedestrian facility actually needs to move, or we need to add one prior to this one to give people that opportunity to cross where it's more convenient. Completely changed the landscape of the project. And the turn movement remained there, but people were no longer able to make a U-turn because that was what was creating a conflict, causing people to be hit and making it more unsafe. But just the comments coming in, we don't want this, and not explanation behind the why, providing that, but going and getting on the ground and listening and walking with those people really helped me to see that, yeah, this is actually a better spot for this particular infrastructure to be put in. And it did change the design of the project. So.
Wow.
real
What a
life.
great story. And it incorporated nearly all of the things that you said you love to do. So a little planning, a little foresight, and then getting a little gum on your shoes as you walk down to the intersection. Indianapolis put in a bus route up on Meridian. And now I can appreciate, even just with that explanation, the fact that they've got stoplights right at the bus stop, as opposed to making somebody walk another 20 or 30 feet to get to a crosswalk. It sounds like this was a similar situation. Because of course I'm thinking about it from a driver's perspective, and I need to be thinking about it from a pedestrian's perspective.
And I will say that the drivers probably was a little upset because it was a recommendation to kind of lower the speed limit there. But what I also had to do was get some of those drivers to come down and to watch that there was only 3 more seconds of delay and not a minute or 2 minutes. And
Yeah.
my question to them then became, if this will make things safer for you and for the person walking, are you okay with this? Would you support this? And the answer was absolutely yes. So it also helped people see from the vehicle perspective that sometimes perception and reality are not the same thing. And so we were even actually able to improve the efficiency of the throughput by reducing the speed limit, putting in another, what we call a hawk signal for a pedestrian crossing. And it made things flow so much easier throughout the entire corridors. Yeah, we got to think
Wow.
about everybody and try to make things better for everyone.
One of the things you talked about in your bio or your intro was how you like to build relationships. And I'm always interested to hear stories about, because our parking folks that are always interacting with elected officials who sometimes have a little bit shorter perspective. They don't take the long view because they're obviously worried about re-elections and things like that. I wonder if you have a story that you could tell about a relationship that you've built with an elected official, and or having to work through a specific issue where you probably weren't aligned in some way.
Sure. Oftentimes, because I tend to lean towards the community's perspective, in the beginning, there may not be total alignment with the elected officials. And I will share a story. And this, I'll take us back probably about 10 years ago, where I was working on a transit development plan. And I had heard from some of the constituencies that they didn't want any transit in their community because when you bring transit, it brings crime. And so at that point, I had to go talk to the board of commissioners within that particular county to hear from them. And so here's what I heard. From a human perspective, all of them agree that this option needed to be there. But as it relates to responding and representing what their constituency want, because they may have had an opposing constituency, they felt like publicly they had to oppose it to show their constituents that they were representing their interests. And so what I had to do was to agree. I understood because I just talked about voting and making sure you're holding people accountable. But what I was also able to do was to talk with those commissioners and figure out what we thought everyone could support based off of why the community were saying they were opposing it. And what I assured the elected officials is that everything that I'm going to provide them is going to be from the data. And if I could just get them to look at the data and respond to that, then I'm sure that we could come up with a viable option. And that I was vested in making sure that they were viewed well by their constituency just as much as we are making sure that we address their issues and concerns. And so by doing that, those commissioners actually connected me with the champions, as I call them, project champions within their communities, just
Yeah.
so leaders that were not elected but were responsible for the community. I was able to go and do some small focus groups with them, listen and really understand what the issue was, and then come back with a recommendation that they all were able to buy into. And as a result, we were able to get 3 projects in the plan. And I would say 2 of those projects are up and running today. And those who originally opposed it are actually utilizing it because they understood the benefit. I believe in getting the right fit for the community and not just going in with this one size fits all model.
Yeah.
And because we listened and made those changes, we were able to win them over. And the elected officials remained in good standing as well. So that's an example that I.
So you must have a million of these stories. They're all feel good stories about, opposed sides, not having the full picture. And it sounds like you're really good at doing that.
I do my best, and I would say that it's not always successful, but in a sense,
Sure.
it is successful because you did try. at the end of the day, you do have to give people what they need, because if you provide them with something that they don't need, it won't get utilized anyway.
Yeah.
And so sometimes myself, I have to know when to fold, right? I have to know when to hold the line and press and push. And then I have to know when I just simply need to fold, because this is not something that is going to be supported.
Yeah.
So what I like to do is figure that out early on in the process, so we're not wasting a lot of taxpayers' money on things that we know that they're not going to support in the first place.
Wholly pragmatic as well. Before we go to the lightning round, is there any question that I didn't ask you that would give you a platform to have a particular perspective that you'd want to get out there?
Sure. I would just, so you briefly mentioned parking. I didn't go into a lot about that because I do have lots of thoughts as a planner and being experienced in the industry about parking, and how parking can sometimes take up a lot of space. Sometimes it can impede vehicles on the roadway. And so I think we need to relook at how we do parking. I would challenge people to think about how parking could actually be used to create more space for people to come together and interact and get to know one another. So it's like a creative placemaking type concept, but with park. As we look at more ways to move people, more people on the same vehicle, more fast, I do think that there's a lot of cheap surface parking throughout Metro Atlanta. And this is not to go against the business owners, because we understand entrepreneurs and the business. But again, just rethinking where we place our parking, how the parking is built, and then the cost of that parking, so that we can still accommodate all the other modes, right? And
Yeah.
still make the other modes attractive to those who may be driving and parking. That's the only thing I would probably like to say. And I think it's also important for us to remember that when we are dealing with lots of different people, that we all understand things in different ways. And so I just continue to challenge individuals to be open, even if you don't agree. And I know I said that already, but
Yeah.
be open, because you never know what a person's experience has been.
Yep.
And one thing that has been very touching for me is that I had an intern from India, and her background was actually architecture. Had nothing to do with transportation, but what she said to me is very important for her. The infrastructure is built safe for children. So that drives her. And so she had the opportunity working here on transportation projects to see we really are thinking about children. We're thinking about everyone. So that made her feel more comfortable. And I think now there's a more interest for her in transportation planning outside of that architecture lens. So you just never know when you're going to meet someone with their experiences being, and how that's going to give you a fresh perspective on what you do on a daily basis. So always be open to learning. If we've learned all we can, then that means we arrived. And then I don't know what the purpose is at that point. So I stay an avid learner, be a good listener, try not to be judgmental.
Yeah, that's good. I appreciate the concept of having an open mind. I will tell you that there will be plenty of people that will listen to this that will commiserate with you around the parking lots and around, you talk to any university director of parking, Joseph included, I'm sure, and they'll tell you that they have ample parking. They just don't have the parking where the parking customers want it sometimes, because everybody wants to park under their desk. And so just fighting that natural tension between having too much, not having enough. We've got plenty, but you've got to park over here, and then you've got to walk, or you've got to take a bus or something else. Those are all really hard things to work out. I'll say that first. And then the second thing, you said something early on about policy. I know that our parking colleagues are working very hard at trying to reshape policies that were put in place when horse and buggies were still part of the landscape. And that part is not easy either, because those rules they have to be dusted off. And then all of the processes that you just described around, why are we changing this? What's the purpose? Is there a benefit? Is there somebody going to be hurt with the policy? All of those things are really hard. It's hard to move the needle on those kinds of things. So I think they'll be able to commiserate with you for sure. So that's great. And then keeping an open mind is always a critical thing. Okay, so I like to call this the lightning round. That shout out a one-word answer to it. But I'm curious if you have a phrase that you're known for. In other words, a phrase is uttered somewhere in your office or in the hallowed capital of Atlanta. And when somebody hears that phrase, they instantly know that it originated out of Kenyata's mouth. Are you known for a phrase?
That's a good question. I guess I would have to ask my colleagues. I always say it's about the people.
Mm.
Be a good steward.
Yeah.
Do everything with integrity.
Do everything with integrity. It's always about the people. I suspect if somebody says it's always about the people, and you say, you know what? I've heard Kenyata say that before. Okay, that's good. It's always about the people. All right. So then my next question is, what's the hardest thing you've ever done in your life?
Hardest thing I've ever done in my life. That's a good question. It probably would be ministry related. I didn't share early on, but I'm also a licensed minister.
Okay.
Probably the hardest thing I had to do in my life was direct someone or advise someone to do something that I probably wouldn't do personally, but what could have been a good option for them. Just trying to give good sound advice, but not knowing whether or not the person is going to maximize that. And I would say in that situation, it was very critical, very important. So I had to give them all the options, whether I agreed with all the options.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. I would imagine I can think about ministers or priests that I know, and I have to believe those are really hard jobs because there are lots of people that need sounding boards and need advice. What's the hardest thing that you have to do in your job today?
The hardest thing I think that I have to do in my job today is number one, making sure that in the workplace, there's a safe environment for my employees where they feel like they can be heard, where they feel like their opinions matter and that they're included and that it's just a safe space for them. And because we do work with a lot of different people and across different teams and departments, sometimes people don't feel as comfortable because maybe it's their first time working with someone or maybe they may have had a bad experience. So I would say creating a workplace where people want to come and contribute on a daily basis is probably the hardest thing on our job.
Yeah.
Because I have things with satisfying clients, making sure I don't say the wrong things to the wrong people.
Sure.
But I think that comes with any job that you do.
Yeah. I hear your servant's heart coming. Yeah. I hear your servant's heart coming out again. Okay. So then if you could wave a magic wand and fix one thing about your job or the planning process as you're putting things in place, what would you use your magic wand for?
I would use my magic wand to probably hypnotize. No, I'm just kidding. I would use my magic wand to make sure that everyone had an opportunity for their voice to be heard. Because again, we oftentimes try to reach people and provide opportunity. That doesn't mean they take advantage of it. So I would wave the wand to make that process a lot easier for people and for them to feel comfortable doing.
Yeah. Okay, great. So now when you're not planning for public transportation, you can tell this is a parking podcast. What do you do for fun?
For fun, I like to skate. I like to sing. I like to dance. I'm a very private person. So I have my group of friends. We hang out. And probably my favorite thing to do is to go to the spa. So self-care, relaxation, you have to make sure that you're healthy in order to serve and help others.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I don't know if you've ever read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, but one of the very early tenets is the PPC balance, the production versus production capacity balance. So I hear that you work hard at that. I've got others that I wish worked a little harder at it just to make sure that, that you have the capacity to do the work. So that's really good. By the way, skating, are you inline skating or are you roller skating?
Roller skating.
Okay. That sounds like fun. I've done that. It was a long time ago.
I grew up roller skating, a little bit of double dutch jump roping, anything. I alluded early on about sports and things like that. So anything active, getting fresh air and includes engaging with other people. I just love doing it.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. So last lightning round question. What are you most proud of?
I'm probably most proud of, so I have 8 nieces and 4 nephews, and I am proud that all 12 of them have graduated high school and going on to college and making something of themselves in whatever area they see fit. So family is very important to me. So I would relate that to family. If you would say in my work, the thing that I'm most proud of is that when I've been asked to do things that I know that went against my character, I feel empowered to say, no, I can't do that.
Yeah. Wow. Good for you. I can hear the resolve in your voice and to do the right thing all the time. You would fit right in here at Parker with all of our core values around honesty and integrity and servant's heart and above and beyond all of those things. I appreciate all of that very much. Okay, I'll give you the last word here as we wrap up. What else should we know about Kenyata and the work that you do?
It's a volunteer, and I'm always looking at a way to help those that are less fortunate to me. Always remembering that we're all just one circumstance away from our situation being changed. So I like to spend my time pouring back into young women. Number one, to make sure that they have the proper self-esteem. Number two, so they know that they can do anything that they set their mind to. And number three, so that they actually have the tools that they need to be successful in life. So I spend that time volunteering and pouring into others. And I think I would end to that. As much as I can pour into others while I have the chance. That is my life legacy.
That's awesome. That's great. I appreciate that very much. I appreciate the work that you do, even though I probably don't really see it. I can appreciate it for sure.
Yeah.
And more than anything, I appreciate you taking time to spend with us today and to share with our parking guests the life of a transportation and mobility planner. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Brian. It has been a pleasure.
That's a wrap for segment 1. We're going to take a break to tell you all about our exciting user conference, Fusion 25, coming in May next year. And then stick around. You're not going to want to miss hearing from my next guest, who will tell us all about something else that's harder than it looks, but not in parking. Stay tuned. Hey, Parker customers, want to connect, learn, and advance with the best in the parking industry? Then mark your calendars for Fusion 25, our exclusive user conference happening from May 27th to May 30th in 2025, right here in Indianapolis. Fusion 25 will be 2 days filled with sessions tailored to your partnership with Parker Technology, engaging workshops, networking, and exclusive access to new products and features. You'll also enjoy events and happy hours from some of our favorite spots right here in Indy. You'll leave the conference with a roadmap to make the most of our partnership, new connections with other Parker Technology clients, and fresh ideas to enhance your operations and customer experience. Don't miss out on Parker's inaugural user conference. Early bird registration opens on October 1st, but for now, you can visit parkertechnology.com/fusion25 to save the date. We'll see you in May 2025. Okay, welcome back to segment 2 of Harder Than It Looks. Joining me now is Nikki Miller from Kairos. Kairos is a team of coaches, consultants who help CEOs build leadership capacity in themselves and them teams in their organizations. A variety of life experiences have prepared her for her role at Kairos, including writing some policy work on Capitol Hill. She has had different roles in education, more than a decade of practice in mediation in the context of family. And at home, she practices creating healthy teams with her best friend, husband, Craig, their 4 children, and their rescue dog, Coco. So I met Nikki several years ago when Kairos began a group coaching series called The Forge. And what I've come to appreciate about Nikki and all of my interactions with her is that she's always very present. She's always super real and authentic. And she's also really observant. One of the sessions she led was about meditation and shining a spotlight on different areas of your thought process, helping you to increase your awareness and then your ability to observe it and let it go. And we're going to get into that a little bit in some of the questions I ask. So Nikki, welcome to Harder Than It Looks.
Thanks so much, Brian. Those are really sweet things to say.
They're all true. So it was easy. I didn't have to make it up, even though I did write it down. Fast. I'll ask you the same question I probably asked Chip a million years ago.
Yeah.
How does one get into executive coaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. And my path to this place is different than Chip's, actually. And it is that I know Chip through mutual connections in town. And he was looking for a female Enneagram 9 on the team. There had been one before. And that's a particular energy that a person brings to a team. And said, put your name in the hat. And at first I laughed because you read in the thing, policy isn't necessarily a dead ringer for this kind of work, or taking a decade out homeschooling my kids. It wasn't super clear, but I was an Enneagram nerd for sure. And that's a tool that we use, a personality tool that we use pretty heavily.
We're going to get into the Enneagram. Don't you worry.
Yeah. So that checked out. And I think there's a personality interest in how people grow, but especially our oldest is 16. So I think every parent has some level of interest in how humans grow and develop. You're trying to help your kids figure out their place in the world, figure out who they are, what makes them tick. And so those interests really align themselves. And every interview, I got more and more interested in the work that we do. And by the end, we both got to clarity. This is something worth trying. And so I went through an apprenticeship of sorts at Kairos. So got some great training on both coaching and the consulting work that we do with teams. And I'm still here. They haven't fired me yet.
That's awesome. How long have you been with Kairos? I should know the answer to that question.
No, you're fine. I started in January 2021. So coming up on 3.5, 4 years, something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So many different launching points I could go to, but let's stick with the policy making first.
Yes.
Because we're going to get to the Enneagram, trust me.
Okay.
I would like to hear what kind of policy work you were working on in Washington. And so if it took you away, obviously you came back, you said you raised your kids, or you homeschooled your kids, but what kind of policy work were you working on? And did any of it show up? Am I living by any of the policies that you shaped?
Yeah, let's see. So I graduated right around the turn of the century, the millennium. Poli-sci graduate, went right to DC like you're supposed to. Got a job. So my first policy work was just being a peon, answering the phone, talking to constituents, that kind of thing. But eventually, as I rose up the ranks, ended up in healthcare policy. All the members of Congress that I worked for were on the Ways and Means Committee. So it was a pretty narrow section of where Ways and Means tax code intersects with healthcare. So Medicare, HSAs, those were the things that I dealt with.
Yeah. Okay. I'm living the HSA dream now. So Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I'm sure you did all the work.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. That feels like ages ago. I've forgotten more acronyms than I ever knew.
I'll bet. Healthcare and funding healthcare is hard.
Yeah.
Okay. So just give us one thing that we might not really appreciate about the process of all that you went through to put policy in place.
It's sausage making for sure. There are some not beautiful parts, but and I'll say in healthcare too, particularly, maybe not surprisingly, there's some players who you wouldn't really want to trust very much, but there are some wonderful people on Capitol Hill. And that was what kept me in the work as long as I was there. I had some great bosses and worked with some, great human beings who were really trying to make the world a better place. So
dedicated to it and bashing against those that you wouldn't want to meet.
Exactly. It's where you want to be, innocent as a dove, but like a serpent, watching out. So
eyes wide open.
Exactly.
I'll bet. Okay. All right. So that's good. That whole sausage making piece fascinates me.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's really hard and it's hard to make progress.
Yeah.
It's hard to build bridges. It's getting harder every day. And so anybody that's been in the works or been in the middle of it, it's always interesting to me to hear stories about how it actually gets done.
And I look back at that time and think, we thought we were really polarized then. My hat's off to the people who are trying to get work done now.
Let's go back to your coaching. So one of the things that you said in the prep material is that your job is about promoting health in executives and then health in executive teams and working on a team that does that for each other. Okay. Yeah. I love that because I get it. I'm a Kairos client in full disclosure. And so I see the heavy lifting that you're all doing on my behalf and on my team's behalf.
Yeah.
The basics. How do you do that? How do you promote health?
Yeah.
And what are the basics? I suspect people that are going to hear this are going to take some golden nuggets away from this conversation. It's going to be one of the best segment twos we've done, only because it's so practical. And anybody listening to this will get the tips or the tricks or the pieces of information that you're going to give them. So I want to start with the foundation of how do you assess it? And then how do you help?
Yeah, that's great. In the two different modalities that we work in, so one-on-one coaching, I wish that there were a quick tip or a trick, and I bet you've experienced this. You just cannot manhandle growth. It really looks not super sexy to realize, oh, I didn't know that I did that compulsive behavior because I wasn't thinking about it. But now that I have this mirror, and that's what I think the best coaches are trying to do is just hold a mirror, put a flashlight on the spots that maybe you hadn't looked at before, and just notice what you're doing. That's the first step. And then we can think about, all right, in the moment, next time, can we make a different choice? But it starts with the noticing. And then on teams, and that is what gives me all the feels, is you get a group of people who are waking up to their own self-sabotages, but not weaponizing that knowledge against each other, but instead using it to be for each other. Hey, I noticed in the meeting, you didn't speak up much. I'm wondering what was going on there. Can you tell me, was there a narrative you were believing? Maybe that's what the feedback is for someone who naturally withdraws to protect themselves.
Yeah.
It might be very different feedback for somebody who's more likely to jump in every time, answer every question with their certainty. But
No idea who you might be talking about.
So different growth paths, but there is just nothing like seeing a group of humans come together and be for each other. The shorthand we use, and I know you've heard it, is we're looking to make a team that's in on the joke with each other.
Yeah.
That, hey, I know you're not perfect. I know I'm not perfect. And we're going to grow together.
Yeah.
And not just for its own sake. That's lovely. But we're trying to get somewhere together. And we'll get there more quickly, more efficiently, more creatively, more collaboratively if we're doing that.
Yep. So you touched on a couple of things that resonate right away with me. The whole part about growth, not being obvious, not being linear, not being easy. And then the mirror piece is actually quite humbling. I can remember, this will make us both laugh.
Okay.
So I have been with Chip since January. So we've sort of officially signed on. I'd been to the Forge, and we'll talk about the Forge in just a second. And my line with Chip was always, I'm good. I got it. I don't need any help. And he would laugh. And so then finally, when I'm not even sure I hit a wall, but it was pretty obvious that I might be able to benefit from somebody to talk to and to help me along. And he always talked about, because I was talking about, okay, maybe we can get others involved. And he's like, no, let's start with you, because obviously the CEO is the highest leverage point. And you're going to see that if we can help you get deeper into what you do and how you do it and all of that, it's going to really help. Yeah. And then there was one particular incident. I don't even remember the circumstance, but I talked to Chip before, and then I went and executed the meeting, and I came back and I said, and we can swear on this podcast, and I just said, leverage my ass. The point of that is that sometimes we know that we need help. Sometimes we don't realize that we need help. And then obviously when you get into it, it can shine a light on things. And so the tool, I think the primary tool that Kairos uses is the Enneagram. Mm-hmm. And so for those that may only be peripherally familiar with the Enneagram, just give us a little thumbnail sketch of what it is and why you and Kairos believe that it's such a powerful tool. And by the way, I agree.
Yeah, there are great personality tools out there, but we have found the Enneagram, which divides us up into 9 personality types, to be the most useful tool for growth for a couple of reasons. One, it recognizes that we're dynamic human beings. I'm not a 9 forever, and I always behave this way. There are seasons of stress that push me to behaviors that look different than that. And then if I feel really safe and secure, I show up differently. But most importantly, it lays out a path for growth. So for me, for my own walk, and just to be clear, working on a team of coaches means I got flashlights and mirrors all up in my grill. And that's when I took the job. I thought, there's no way I work in this environment and I stay the same. No way. I'm going to grow here. And that has been true. So I feel you on that. But so my work as an Enneagram 9 is remembering that my voice matters. And so I'd be one of the ones more likely to withdraw, maybe not take as firm of a stance because I don't want to make anybody mad. So I know though now, knowing is half the battle, more than half the battle. I'm going to need to got lots of shorthand for it. But one of my favorite is I need a fence post. They can't wrestle with the cloud. We can't make progress as Kairos if I show up as amorphous Nikki. I got a fence post and say something, stand by something in here.
Yeah.
So anyway, maybe that's helpful.
Yep. So 1 through 9. And then for me, the most powerful piece of it as I got deeper into it is it talks about base motivation. Okay. Attitude or DISC or all the others talk about behaviors.
Yes.
or talk about personality types.
Yeah.
This is about your sort of your base, and then the triggers that cause you to lose your mind and then go into protective behavior, which of course then shows up in various ways. Nines withdraw, threes get aggressive, and we start to act out, as it were. And people are looking at us like, where's Brian? What just happened to Brian? And then we happen to be in a season of that, by the way. So I don't need to elaborate. But
Yeah.
you triple and quadruple the size of the business and things start to get a little bit more stressful in different ways. And just being able to cope with that is a challenge on a day-to-day basis for sure.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. The getting underneath the behavior to the motivation, and still the work is the noticing. But once you've started to notice, oh, wow, I see what I was protecting myself from there, what I was trying to do, allows for longer term change. I can try to just convince most, but that won't work long term. But if I can notice, oh, look at me, I'm withdrawing here, then I have a better chance of showing up how I want to show up over the long haul.
I think 3 and 8s probably show up a lot in the business world. It might be interesting for you to take us through those profiles, because I think the things that you will say will resonate with people listening to the podcast. So just toss out a couple of sort of 3-ness and 8-ness base motivations.
Sure. I might see your 3, 8, and then raise it to a 7 too. We'll just cover Enneagram divides all those 9 types into 3 different stances. This is the way I'm going to solve a problem when I'm confronted, or how I'm going to get my need met. So I mentioned before, my strategy is withdrawing, but there's 3 types that are more assertive. If there's something I need, I'm going to get it. I will take action. I'm going to move forward. There's just a lot of forward motions. What comes to mind for those 3 numbers? So the 3s they see the goal and they're going to win. Like that's what's motivating a 3. Just real broad brushstroke there.
Yeah. Yep.
And 8, I think they're just such natural leaders, and no one's going to be the boss of them. They're going to go get it. We're going. You can come with me or you don't have to. I might roll over you on the way there. Maybe that's preferable to me, to roll over you on the way there. That feels pretty strong, but we're going. And then 7s, I think all 3 of those numbers, of those types, tend to be very future oriented. I see the future and we're going. And 7s, it's that creative, nice, and especially in tech, the design world, you can see some 7 leaders. They've got a vision for where they're going, and it maybe feels more like a chow line. Like it's a fun experience and we're all going together is how I would think about those, just real simply.
No, that's good. Okay. So if you were to recommend a book and or some resource for someone who heard this and, okay, what I'd like to learn more about the Enneagram, what would you recommend? And we could put it in the show notes for you.
Oh, that's great. You know what? One of my favorites recently, we're pretty big Suzanne Stabile fans at Kairos.
Okay.
And she's got a book, and I like it because it covers just this subject, the stances, and how our stances do show us the way of growth. The Journey Toward Wholeness by Suzanne Stabile, I think would be a great starting place.
Okay. All right. Awesome.
Yeah.
And I think I don't remember if it was your post or if it was someone actually put out, "This is not a test" as well out on LinkedIn.
Yes. Yeah. That's my post, and hopefully others out there too, but yes.
Okay. Go find Nikki Miller on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And look at her posts and it'll show up as, "This is not a test. This is actually something that you or Chip or everyone wrote from Kairos." Is that fair?
That is fair. Yeah. Group effort.
That is my shorthand when I need to go back and reorient myself around all the numbers and who I'm dealing with in that particular moment. I'm going back to "This is not a test." So it's been a good resource for me.
I'm glad to hear it. We had a lot of fun writing it.
Yeah, I'll bet. Okay. So now let's go to, I want to flip over to the session that you did on meditation during the Forge. So what Kairos has put together is they put together a group of CEOs. There are probably, 15 or 20 of us, and they've already gone through season 3. They're on to season 4, but during season 3, slowing down. And I really appreciated that. The minute I heard the opening theme of season 3, episode 1 of slowing down, I was like, "Ooh, this might be helpful to me."
Yeah.
And I think one of the first things that we did was you led us through a meditation exercise.
Mhm.
And I've been meditating for 5 years, 5 days a week. And it was starting to get a little, I don't know what, stale, something, a little rote. Some of the techniques around spotlight and things like that I thought were really helpful. So maybe you could share with us a vignette or some sense for how to meditate and then use the concept of a spotlight to get to what you're really thinking.
Man, speaking of harder than it looks, right? Sitting still is so hard. I think that is not an easy thing to do. But yeah, I was really impacted by Amishi Jha's research that, like you were saying, says, look, our attention is broken down into several pieces. We've got the spotlight that we are able to focus in, but we also have got this floodlight that helps us be aware. And then, of course, the switch that's knowing which one to employ when. Obviously, there's a lot of demands on our attention in this moment. And so knowing how to train our brains to be able to use those facilities well, I think is one of the big benefits of meditation. And so, yeah, we did an exercise that practiced putting our flashlight on a body scan. Are we even aware that we're in our own body, of the data that's coming into us from our body? I think it can be so easy to just, or for me anyway, to pretend like I'm just a brain walking around on a stick that it's just, and not remember, oh yeah, let's see, that pain in my left shoulder, is there something I'm not dealing with? Am I carrying some stress here that I need to look at? Am I procrastinating? That'd be the deadly sin of a 9 about something that I need to be paying attention to. So listening to our bodies. Yeah, but it's impressive, a 5-year practice, Brian. I feel like I'm still in toddler stages of really committing consistent time to that practice. Yeah.
Okay. So you talk about spotlight, and what was the second one?
Floodlight, just awareness. Yeah. So that'd be like a practice where you're sitting and just noticing the thoughts that are going by, but not latching on to any of them. Oh, look at that. Another thought, another word.
Another thought. Yeah. I do not remember. I will look it up and I will get it in the show notes as well. I read the book written by somebody from Google. Do you know which book that is?
I'm not sure.
Anyway, it was a book about meditation. And then the thing that really helped me help know that it was the right thing to do is this concept of the ability to focus on your breathing, first of all, when you start.
Sure.
And then when your mind starts to drift, it easily just let it go. It's okay. You just thought that thought.
Yeah.
But let it go. And all of that is in the name of training your brain to be able to have a thought and let it go and come back to center.
Yes.
And that to me spoke to someone's ability to be distracted and or to, you look at the mirror's up and you have your thoughts and you have to be able to acknowledge it and do something with it. Either set it to the side, write it down. I've got to think about that later or something. Yeah. And so that whole process of being aware of what you're thinking and then being able to acknowledge it and let it go, I think is one of the things that was most impactful to me about meditation and the power of meditation.
Totally. I think that practice of observing our thoughts helps us really know that we aren't our thoughts. Because when we're in the spin cycle about how poorly whatever just happened, we can't separate ourselves from that thing. And yeah, getting some distance. The other thing that's really been impactful, even for me, just in my not to 5 years of practice yet, but just flexing the muscle of not judging whatever you find in your thought loop but just, oh, there it is. Non-judgmental observation does not come easily for me. I think I have a pretty strong one wing, and being hard on myself is much easier than just noticing. I feel like I'm still learning that, but that's one of my goals for my time in meditation as well.
Yeah. Okay. So you touched on ones. I've had recent experience with ones.
Yeah.
And I have been known to, I'll say, be hard on people. And the latest concept that I've that I've begun to observe about myself is when I don't get a reaction from somebody, I think the answer is to go harder. And despite the damage that I've probably created on the front half of that, and what I've learned is that ones absorb all that energy and literally don't give it back. And so again, that might be a personality type that would resonate with somebody.
Yeah.
As you're thinking through, give us a thumbnail sketch of a one.
Sure. ones have an inner critic. I think every type's got a message that their ego's on repeat about. If I don't win, I don't have worth. If I make people mad, I've ruined. I won't. But the inner critic for a one is just so loud. And if they are bad or corrupt, that message of you didn't do it good enough, the shoulds that the inner critic of a one can generate are just endless shoulding all over themselves. And then sometimes that can turn outward and they're keeping everybody else in line too. But I think when you're around a one and you receive some of that criticism, you have to remember whatever you're hearing is half of what they're giving themselves. So I'm married to a one, and it's good for me to remember that. It's really, the Enneagram's been so useful at work, but definitely in marriage and in parenting too, just for generating compassion. Oh, I never knew how hard it could be to be you.
Generating compassion. I love that. Okay. So in this one discussion, you've touched on one of the other questions I had going back to the overall scope of the executive coaching.
Yeah.
Tell me how you help executives cope with this concept of vulnerability is strength, but I always have to be strong, right? And so this concept of out front all the time, got to be confident, got to know what I'm doing. And then the message we're getting, and I embrace it, but I struggle with is, okay, so when is it okay to be weak? And when is it okay to be vulnerable? And if I'm too vulnerable, will I get taken advantage of? And all of those things, it is this awful tug of war, if you will, between the inner critic and the need to show strength all the time.
No, that's so real, Brian. And I do feel like there's a paradox there, right? We can't coach them into victimhood, right? It's like, I'm so vulnerable, I can't make any decision. But I do think that, especially to your point about aggressive, so the more assertive stances, 3, 7, and 8s, may be more likely to be in leadership, and particularly in that CEO seat. The work for those 3 types is getting in touch with their heart for all 3 of them. Feeling repression is what's going on there. And the funny thing is, as you tap into your deep heart and recognize what's going on, and if you're willing to risk sharing it, which is risky and not on LinkedIn necessarily, maybe
right.
and maybe not even all of the executive team, if you got a 10-person executive team, but with a small group of people, sharing your deep heart actually is perceived as strength. That's the crazy judo flip, is nobody's really fooled by us pretending that we're stronger than we are or that we're perfect. Because nobody is. So being your authentic self is the strong move there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll say that to myself 10 times. And I'll write it on a whiteboard 10 times.
Yeah. I wish it was that easy. I wish there was a shortcut, but it's just doing it.
Yeah.
A lot of times and feeling what that feels like.
It's tough. Okay. Yeah. So in your bio, you did not write that you homeschooled your kids for 10 years.
Yeah.
And you did talk about, you were talking about the Enneagram and how it's helpful. I definitely get that, because you can at least help your children see themselves, again, back to the mirror, and help them appreciate that we will have compulsions or those triggers or what have you. And it's really just a matter of managing them. Tell us about homeschooling for 10 years and how you did that, because that sounds like a hard job too.
Sure. My first 3 kids were born in Washington, D.C. We lived downtown. And when it came, I had big plans for myself. I'll go get my PhD as soon as the first one's in kindergarten. And then as she got to that age, we just weren't really thrilled with any of the school options at that time, and learned about this thing called homeschooling. And in DC, I got to tell you, I'm homeschooling along. There are literally a PhD, a lot of type A moms. It was just a really lovely community to be in for a while, of really driven parents wanting to do the best for their kids, and it was just a really sweet community. So definitely hard. There are days where I wanted to pull my hair out for sure, but especially when they were younger. Those are tough years of parenting, but it was a delightful way to connect with my kids. Honestly, I think it was such a provision for me and my personality, which really likes peace. And I only had one sibling growing up. The discord that 4 kids can generate is pretty significant. And so having something that I genuinely love, which is learning, to connect us, was just a really lovely thing. An unexpected surprise that I didn't plan on, but worked out really well.
Okay. So are you through with the homeschooling at this
Yes.
point?
Yeah. So then we moved to Indianapolis and ended up one block from the Oaks Academy, which is a pretty neat school
Yeah.
in downtown Indy, which had a real similar heart for redeeming cities, bringing life to neighborhoods that maybe didn't have as much before. And yeah, very diverse, intentionally campus. And so eventually all the kids ended up there.
Guided them all skillfully. And I'm sure your husband, Craig, was right there with you all
Yeah.
along.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
All right. So now I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball, but I did give you a little heads up. So one of the new things that we're doing with segment 2 is we're asking our segment 2 non-parking guests tell us their favorite, worst horror story, whatever your favorite parking story is, because we know that everybody has a parking story.
That's the truth. I tell you what. So thanks for the heads up on that. I thought, gosh, the first thing that came to mind was like, do I have a good garage story? And I just feel like there, I always pick the wrong line inevitably. And a quirky parking thing about myself is I am a huge fan of backing in. So if you know me at all, you'll know I'm the one who's backed in at the party. But by far the worst parking experience I ever had was at a Radiohead concert. It was a torrential rainstorm. I think we spent more time leaving that concert than we were there. It was just awful. And it just, yeah, it's not a fun feeling, is it? Just being stuck in a group of cars trying to all get to one exit. So nothing too dramatic, but that's what I got.
That reminds me of a time I was in Buffalo, New York with one of my customers, and we'd gone to dinner out on this peninsula, awesome steak dinner. And we were sitting there, and then we were leaving just as the T-Pain was letting out. So I think it's T-Pain. I don't know these people. I'm not in the genre of singing or songs, so I'm sure I'll get made fun of on the podcast. I hope I will, because that'll mean more than 2 people are listening. But it took us longer to get out of the parking lot or away from the restaurant than it did for us to eat dinner. It was tough. And so anybody listening to this from the parking world will commiserate with you, because trust me, they are trying to get you out of that garage or that lot as fast as possible, because they know that people don't like to wait. And so there is technology coming to help you.
I love that.
Yeah, it's good. Okay. We're getting close to time, but I want to make sure that I give you the floor. If during your mental preparations, there were things that you were anticipating that you might share that I didn't ask, I want to just hand you the floor and ask you if there's anything else about executive coaching, about personality, about motivation that you think might be helpful to all of those folks listening.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks for offering that up. We covered a lot of the territory that I hoped to. I guess I would just say, yeah, one of the most impactful books I ever read, which is Mindset. And so just leaning in wherever you are on your growth journey. There's people listening, I'm sure, who are way ahead of me on my journey, but just wherever you are, take that next step. Maybe that's reaching out to a coach. Maybe that's reading the book, learning about yourself a little bit more, but don't quit.
Yeah, that's great. So Mindset, I want to say, is that Carol Dweck?
That is, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was, I will say one thing about that book, and one of the things that I learned, and maybe it's a duh in like retrospect, but growth versus closed mindset, right? And the concept that you can actually change. Like it's not set in stone. You can actually open your mind and make real change.
People ask, what kind of clients do we work with? And it's all over the board in terms of what kind of product they're selling or making. But that's the common denominator. Whoever we're working with has got to have that. If you don't have a growth mindset, it's just going to be like beating your head against a wall working with Kairos.
Yeah, it'll be hard because you'll be poking and prodding, and they'll be like, hey, no, what's next?
That's too threatening. Yeah.
Yeah. Or it's too threatening. Yeah. Even worse. They're like, no, I can't do that.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And I can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom and for coming on the show and enlightening all of us with not necessarily tips and tricks, but just the ability to recognize ourselves in ourselves and then know that there's a path forward to getting better.
Love it. Thanks for having me, Brian. It's been great.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Nikki. Okay, that's a wrap on this episode of Harder Than It Looks, Parking Uncovered, presented by Parker Technology. Please leave us a review if you liked what you heard. Make sure you tune in next month as we continue to uncover tips, tricks, and best practices to manage what we all know is harder than it looks: parking a car. Bye for now.